Iran today sent its response to Donald Trump's latest peace proposal. In short, Trump claims that Iran is begging for a peace deal, while Iran says that it's Donald Trump who needs the deal more. To be specific, though, in Iran they stated that their supreme leader, Khamenei, promised to protect the country's nuclear and missile capabilities, which US President Donald Trump is trying to limit. And Khamenei even threatened a devastating strike against the United States of America. But diplomacy has not been stopped, and the parties continue to exchange drafts of a peace plan. At the same time, not only Iran but also American media questioned the statement of US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth about the cost of this war. And they insist that this amount is at least twice as much as was stated the day before. My name is Alex Pici. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. In addition, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pici News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it happens. So, Iran has presented its response to the latest amendments by the United States of America to the draft plan for ending the war. Iran's response shows that diplomacy is still not completely frozen. And this is happening against the backdrop of US President Donald Trump maintaining a naval blockade and considering new military actions against Iran, which, by the way, we talked about in a separate episode on this YouTube channel just yesterday. Let me briefly bring you up to speed. Last weekend, Iran presented the United States of America with a proposal to resume operations in the Hormuz Strait and to end the war. In other words, essentially to reach a peace agreement. But Iran suggested postponing the nuclear negotiations to a later stage. That is, in fact, to return to point A, where this war began. On Monday, the White House Special Envoy Stephen Witkoff sent a list of amendments aimed at bringing the nuclear issue back into the draft text of the future peace agreement. And here is one of the messages. The amendments included a requirement for Iran not to even attempt to remove enriched uranium from its bombed nuclear facilities and not to resume any activity at these sites, as long as the negotiations continue. And against this backdrop, Trump stated, quote, "No one knows what the negotiations are about except me and a few other people. They really want to make a deal. We have a problem because no one knows for sure who the leaders in Iran are. It's a small problem." In response, the Iranians claim that it is actually Trump who is desperately in need of a deal, while the Iranians can afford to drag things out for a couple more months, that's for sure. I should note that on Thursday afternoon, Trump held a meeting with his national security team about Iran, which lasted about 45 minutes in the White House Situation Room. The meeting was attended by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and advisor, and that very envoy Stephen Witkoff. Meanwhile, the commander of U.S. Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, briefed Trump and his team on new plans for possible military action against Iran. Again, so as not to repeat myself, we discussed these plans with you yesterday on this YouTube channel. If you missed it, go to the channel and be sure to watch. As for Iran's response, it's still not exactly known, but publicly Iran is sending not very friendly signals. The supreme leader of Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei, in another written message, promised to defend his country's nuclear and missile capabilities, which US President Donald Trump is trying to limit. And now I'll quote from Mojtaba Khamenei's statement, which was distributed by Iranian media. Quote, 90 million proud and honest Iranians, both inside the country and abroad, consider all of Iran's spiritual, human, scientific, industrial, and technological capabilities, from nanotechnology and biotechnology to nuclear and missile potential, to be a national treasure. Well, therefore, Iranians are not going to give any of this up. The statement was read by the host of Iran's state television on Thursday, April 30th, late in the evening. Mojtaba Khamenei himself has not appeared in public since taking office as supreme leader after the death of his father, Ali Khamenei, during US and Israeli airstrikes. The media reported that Khamenei Jr. might be wounded, but Tehran denies this. In addition, Mojtaba Khamenei hinted that Iran would maintain control over the Hormuz Strait. According to him, Iran's control over this important waterway will make the Persian Gulf safer, and Tehran's legal regulations and new management of the strait will benefit all countries in the region. Iran also threatened, quote, prolonged and painful strikes against American forces if Washington resumes attacks and again asserts its claims to the Hormuz Strait. Well, overall, it doesn't really seem like Tehran is ready to make absolutely every concession to Donald Trump. But of course, that's not all. Now the Iranians are openly mocking the assessment of US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth about how much money the US has already spent on the war against Iran. Pete Hegseth stated at a recent hearing in the US Senate that the US has spent $25 billion on the war against Iran. The Iranians said that this amount is 4 times higher, not counting the losses suffered by ordinary people. For example, Americans, because gasoline prices have risen to a record high. The last time prices were this high was in July 2022, when Russia was waging a full-scale war against Ukraine. Now, these prices are $4.30 per gallon there, in some places even higher. But while the Iranians, for obvious reasons, will of course exaggerate this figure, the American media still calculate the real numbers. Well, because we're talking about their taxes. And here, according to American officials who rely on internal estimates, the US has spent at least $50 billion on the war against Iran. That's almost twice as much as the Pentagon officially acknowledges. This information was revealed by CBS News, and according to the channel's sources, the $25 billion figure does not include damaged and destroyed equipment, as well as harm to military personnel and US facilities in the Middle East. Most of the funds go toward ammunition which needs to be replenished. In addition, the American military has lost at least 24 MQ-9 Reaper reconnaissance and strike drones, each costing at least $30 million. So that's already at least $720 million. Plus, keep in mind, there was damaged aircraft, planes shot down, helicopters shot down, strikes on a military base, an air base in Saudi Arabia, and so on. Plus, there are additional expenses related to fuel, redeployment of forces, and setting up military infrastructure. And so, Democratic Senator Chris Coons also stated that the estimate of $25 billion is clearly understated and does not take into account the costs of maintaining troops in the region for 2 months. As for the costs of restoring and building military bases, the Pentagon hasn't even been able to provide an approximate amount yet. Well, sources claim that almost all US bases in the Middle East have been affected by Iranian attacks in one way or another. And the war is already affecting the economy of the United States of America. At a hearing in the Senate Armed Services Committee, Congressman Ro Khanna asked Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth how much the campaign would cost the country's citizens, given the rising costs of gasoline and groceries. And so, Defense Secretary Hegseth avoided giving a direct answer, instead suggesting to consider, quote, what would be the cost if Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons? So, Pete Hegseth's general advice to all Americans is, endure it. You may not like it, but endure it. And what's important to note is that the congressional committee hearings are taking place against the backdrop of the US presidential administration discussing the allocation of additional funds to cover expenses and replenish the arsenal. This figure is very important. American officials plan to request up to $200 billion. This figure is already more realistic. At the same time, Trump allows for the possibility of resuming military actions using the latest Dark Eagle hypersonic missiles, as well as sending special forces to seize uranium stockpiles if Iran does not yield. Well, as we can see, Iran is not very inclined to yield. I'll leave it at that. What do you think? What are your conclusions? Write in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or sponsorship on YouTube. All the links and details are in the description for this video. There are different platforms and different options. Choose the one that suits you. I will be grateful for your support. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.